Good afternoon, everyone. This is Drew Camp, Director of Government Relations at the Ames Chamber of Commerce. Today's update includes quite a bit of information because not only was it funnel week, which bills had to pass through, Senate bills had to pass through House committees and House bills had to pass through Senate committees, and a lot of bills died because of those parameters, but there was also quite a bit of news and some new leadership in the Senate Republican caucus as a result of actions this week. We'll jump right in, starting with kind of the controversial issue to kind of get that out of the way, and then jump into the policy piece. As most of you probably know and probably saw, on Monday afternoon, Senator Bill Dix, who was serving as the Senate Republican Majority Leader and the setter of really the policy agenda for the Senate Republican caucus, resigned his post after video was put online of him kissing a female lobbyist in a Des Moines bar. It happened rather quickly, and then also the response was very quick as well. On Wednesday, the Republican caucus, Senate Republican caucus, went in and selected new leadership. And the new leadership had just very few changes. Jack Whitford, who was in the Senate President chair, is now the Senate Majority Leader and will drive the policy focuses of the Senate Republican caucus. Senator Charles Schneider from West Des Moines, who was the Senate Whip, will now be the Senate President and preside over the Senate when they're in session. And then the only female in the Senate Republican caucus, Senator Amy Sinclair from Allerton, was voted in as Senate Republican Whip to really whip up the votes for their initiatives as they go into session. Senator Sinclair's seat as an assistant majority leader had to then be filled, and that was filled by Senator Jake Chapman from Adel. So that filled up the leadership positions, but then there was one more thing that had to be done due to the vacancy left in District 25 by the vacating of the seat by Senator Bill Dix. And the governor took care of that yesterday when she set the special election for District 25 for the most recent date she could. It will be Tuesday, April 10th, which is exactly 1 week before the 100-day mark of the legislative session when they're supposed to adjourn. It is widely expected, though we won't know for sure until the end of the day today when the filing deadline officially closes, but it's widely expected that Democrat Tracy Freese will take on former House member and former USDA Rural Development Director as soon as earlier this week, Annette Sweeney from Alden. The election once again will be on April 10th, and then the soonest that individual, whoever wins in that special election, the soonest they would be able to fill in and get into that seat would probably be the 17th. So it will be really interesting to see if they even do get any chance to take their seat when the legislature is still in session. But there is still quite a bit of policy work and budgetary and appropriations work to get done, so it's very easily could be the case that they will get that opportunity. As I mentioned, the filing deadline for candidates hoping to appear on the primary election ballot is also concluding today at 5 p.m. I think it's important to note here in our districts, these aren't the final pieces that we'll see on the general election on November 6th, but these are the individuals so far who are certified and approved to be on the June 5th primary election ballot in our areas. In Senate District 23, in the seat currently held by Democrat Herman Kornbach, he will be challenged by Libertarian Eric Cooper, who has run for other local seats in the state legislature, so his name should be familiar. Tracy Freese will once again compete with Annette Sweeney in the November 6th general election because the April 10th election only puts them in the seat until the next election, and being that Senator Dix was up for re-election in November, they will then have to likely face each other once again in November. And it will be interesting because if Annette Sweeney is the victor in that race, it will be interesting for the Republican caucus because that will then make the number of their female members go from 1 to 2. So it will obviously double the number of their female members. In the other Senate district that we have here in the region in Story County, in Senate District 24, Senator Jerry Bain, who's the longest tenured member of the Iowa Senate, he actually won't have to run for re-election as it is only the odd-numbered districts who will appear on the ballot in November. In the House, Democratic Representative Beth Wessel-Chrishell will be challenged by Republican Ben Brown in District 45. Democrat Lisa Heddens will once again, currently, she is set to run unopposed, which she has done in the past. And then Republican Representative Rob Bacon and Dave Dio will face Democrats Tim Winters and Brenda Brink, respectively. It is important to note that even though this is the filing deadline for the primary election in June, there will be a second filing period for the general election on November 6th. For state and federal officials, the period will run from July 30th to August 25th, and for county officials, the filing period will run from August 6th to August 29th. So we will officially know what the ballot will look like for the November election by the end of August. As I had previously mentioned before all the election and other issues that had come up this week is also a big policy week because it's funnel week, which once again means Senate bills had to pass through House committees, House bills had to pass through Senate committees. So as you would expect, some bills made it and some bills did not. So some of the bills that I wanted to highlight that did make it through the legislative funnel are the governor's priority bill, one of her priority bills, which is Future Ready Iowa, and that's really the biggest driving workforce policy bill. Deals with apprenticeships and scholarships and really tying together K-12 and higher education as well as business and industry to address the state's workforce development needs. Another bill that made it through was some remediation, some fixes to the water quality bill that was signed into law. That's working its way through the House and is expected to be considered in the Senate here in the remainder of the session, as it will remain alive until the session adjourns. Another bill that's important as well for workforce development is WIOA conformity, and what that is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And that's our most current federal standard for the workforce development law passed by the Department of Education and the United States Congress. And what it does is it conforms state workforce development and local workforce boards to the federal law and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And it also expands the membership of the state board, which should be a good thing as we go forward. And that conformity with the federal piece is really important to make sure that we're really capturing the full impact of that program. There's two energy bills that are also moving forward that have big impacts on our utilities. And some of them are getting a lot of attention as well because they do have impacts on the rebate programs that they offer for energy efficiency. That's something that's been in the news quite a bit. But that's something both of those bills that passed through this week and funnel week to stay alive would impact. So that is something, if you are concerned about those programs or are perhaps someone who works or has an interest in utilities around the state, keep track of that bill because it will have impacts on how utility billing and utility services are provided going forward. And finally, the last one I wanted to touch on that lived is the DRAM shop insurance. And that really has to do with limits for restaurants and bars when there's an alcohol-related injury. The best example of that would be the keg stand down in West Des Moines and the liability they faced because the individual who had gone the wrong way on Highway Interstate 80 and killed the prisoner and the two public safety officers on eastbound I-80. That was something that really drew the attention there, and that's what that bill kind of works to address. Some bills that I wanted to touch on that died in the legislative funnel. The religious freedom bill, we were happy to see that officially get put to bed because for obvious reasons there's issues that come from multitudes of areas whenever you talk about a religious freedom bill, especially when you look at the diversity and inclusion piece and the anti-discriminatory nature of our employers and just communities in general. It's something that we really, really did not want to see move forward, and we were happy to see that that did not make it through the legislative funnel. There was also the cannabis oil expansion, which is pretty self-explanatory. That died as well in this week's legislative funnel. And also the bottle bill expansion, which would actually increase the amount that would go towards the deposits for bottles, actually died in the session as well in this legislative funnel. Some quick issues that I did want to touch on, I already mentioned some of them. Future Ready Iowa is a key piece of workforce development policy that we're watching. It passed unanimously, which is fairly rare for some of these major bills like this to have passed. It passed 98-0 on Tuesday in the Iowa House, and it now moves over to the Senate where it awaits action on the unfinished business calendar and will remain alive for the rest of the session. It's important to touch on the House tax reform bill as well. Even though nothing formally publicly is happening, there are conversations in the background that are occurring. They have no intention of taking up the Senate bill. They are working on their own language and their own policy and their own legislation. But we are really working, we as in the Chamber of Commerce and our partners at the Iowa Chamber Alliance are really working to try to make sure we can find a way to include corporate in their bill as well without breaking the bank. I already touched on the Energy Omnibus bill. That's another bill that saw action this week and has a big impact on both utility providers and utility consumers. So if you have an interest in that, please do make sure you click below on the link to that bill and read a little bit more about that. Next week, we expect to see yet again a lot more action on a lot of different bills, whether it be Future Ready Iowa, continued discussions with tax reform, and then obviously budgets. Now that we have the funnel week behind us and the new revenue estimating conference numbers from last week, we really expect the budget targets and the appropriations committees to be a key thing that they will be focusing in on, as you would expect, to close out the session. So we will continue to watch those, and we also do expect at some point to really kind of ultimately finally see what a de-appropriations will look like for FY 2018. So those are really some things we'll be monitoring going forward, and it's sure to prove to be a very exciting week next week. So please come back and visit us and watch the video next week, because it's sure to be very informative and jam-packed with new information then. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend and enjoy your St. Patty's Day.